Hi everybody, Ian Bremmer here, and a quick take to kick off your week. So much going on. Iran, an area I want to talk about right now with very significant demonstrations all over the country, and a regime that is very prepared, as we've seen historically, to repress and brutally so. We've got various reports from organizations, some credible sources that are saying well over 500 protesters are dead, a fair number of police and soldiers as well, probably in the dozens. There are some sources talking about thousands. Inside the Trump administration, they say they do have good information privately on what's going on, and that it is a lot worse. The violence is a lot worse by the state than what we are consuming in the media. President Trump has said that if that occurs, that the Americans are going to take action to rescue the Iranian protesters. Obviously late for a lot of them, but nonetheless, that is the talk. They're also saying that the Iranian regime wants to talk. And I think that you put those two things together, and what that gets you is that clearly the Trump administration is preparing to take military strikes soon to show that they can. Likely something like the Basij headquarters, the paramilitary groups that report to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and are involved directly in the repression of these unarmed civilians. Perhaps also local police headquarters and the rest. This is not, in other words, a regime change operation. It's not take out the supreme leader, but rather showing that the Americans are directly on the side of the protesters. What happens as a consequence of that? Well, the Iranians are saying that if the Americans engage in strikes, that they will hit back against Israel, hit back against American bases in the region. That is completely not credible from the Trump administration perspective. Keep in mind that they've been down this road before a couple times. Trump ordered the assassination of Qasem Soleimani at the end of his first administration. The Iranian response was virtually nothing. Trump and Israel engaging in the so-called 12-day war last year and pushed back Iran's nuclear program and ballistic missile program and their uranium reprocessing and enrichment, all of that. And Iran response against Israel, yes, with a number of Israeli civilians getting killed, but nothing meaningful against the United States, and that's what really matters to Trump, of course. So he certainly doesn't see the Iranian threats as having any real potential recourse. Don't think he sees any real risk of shutting down the Straits of Hormuz, which is the one thing that could really bring oil prices to spike in otherwise an oversupplied environment with not a lot of demand and relatively low prices. Given all of that, unless the regime were truly on its last legs and feeling like the demonstrators with some support on the outside by the United States, maybe with some tougher sanctions, maybe with some resources provided to the Iranians on the ground, and they're already getting Starlink support from Elon Musk, maybe all of that. If they felt like they were on their last legs, then you could see them, really taking a shot at whatever they could get, including American bases in the region. But that is not where we are. My friend and brilliant Iran analyst Karim Sajadpour has been doing a lot of thinking about this. And at the end of a piece he just wrote in The Atlantic, he concludes that brutality can delay the regime's funeral, but it's unlikely to restore its pulse. Fair enough, but delaying the funeral is what they are playing for right now. And as long as that is the case, the likelihood that this escalates dramatically militarily in the region is very low, which is one of the reasons why it wasn't a significant top risk for us back in when we put our piece out a week ago in 2026. The broader question, of course, is, okay, so let's say the Americans engage in those strikes and Iran doesn't do anything in response, and now they're saying the Iranians want to talk. What does that look like? Because the United States is willing to work with this regime in the same way that the United States under Trump is willing to work with a brutal regime in Venezuela as long as they do what the Americans want. And in this case, the question would be, about allowing the inspectors back in and getting rid of their nuclear program and ballistic missile program in ways that would be seen as credible to the Americans and the Israelis. Also stop supporting proxies across the region, which have already been beaten and bloodied by Israel and the United States over the course of the past couple of years. And in return for that, you might be able to see some sanctions relief, the only thing that could help the Iranians turn their economy around a bit, and also to provide some support, economic support, for the protesters that right now, and most of these protests are about how crippled the economy has become, how mismanaged. Most of them are not fundamentally about the brutality of the regime, though, of course, the longer this goes on, the more all of these things become conflated. At the same time, there is no real leadership of the opposition in Iran in that regard, different from Venezuela. There's also no particular signs, at least now, that the military or the security forces are in any way fragmented. And though the supreme leader, who has been unwilling to engage with the Americans, he's been very hardline, Khamenei, is in his mid-80s and ailing, he also handpicked all the top security leaders, and so far it doesn't seem to be any sense that they are willing to give him up or go against him. It's hard to imagine in the near term this is actually the end of the regime. It doesn't feel like an imminent collapse. We'll see where it goes, of course. But for now, that does not seem to be the intention of the U.S., and it doesn't seem to be the vulnerability of the Iranians. Even though long term, I agree with Kareem, these guys are on borrowed time, and hopefully we see the end of this regime very soon. The Europeans, of course, are not real actors here. They say they are monitoring the situation. It's the way the Europeans say thoughts and prayers, the way the Americans do after your latest mass shooting, when they know something's happened that's really bad, but they aren't prepared to actually do anything. The Russians are upset because, of course, they have a lot of support from Iran for their drone program, a lot of coordination. They consider them a strategic partner, but not an ally, because it's not like Russia's going to intervene and do anything to try to keep the Iranians afloat, just like they did nothing on the sidelines of Venezuela. For the Chinese, they're not a military or security player. This is much more the long game, where they think they're benefiting as a stable player that is increasingly more reliable by many countries around the world than the United States is perceived to be, as angry as they are with what the U.S. is doing unilaterally, both in its backyard and more broadly. So that's where we are right now. We'll watch this very carefully going forward and talk to you all real soon.